Hello, everyone. This is Scott Smith, and I'm here with another Saturday service. I'm actually recording this the night before because I'm going to go have fun with friends tomorrow and play some games. Let's adjust my camera here. I welcome you to a background. I took this photo a while ago. This was a Buddha and the Lovers, and this was a little bit of some soul work at the time that I was doing this and some release. You see some of the tools there. All of these were part of releasing a connection. But I would mention that as I start the video. I'm just going to shuffle some cards as I talk. This week for the message, I want to talk about practice and grief. This came up for me several times this week. So the message is short and with a little card at the end, and that's what I'm going to leave it at. So I have a great therapist, and I was thinking and reflecting on some of the things that she said in our recent session and comparing them to my own training and my own processing, the way that I sort of walk through different things. And I'm going through a significant transformative period of my life. I'm at the crossroads and I've moved on in a different direction. And I'm experiencing a lot of grief. In the last 4 months, we lost my beautiful dog Trixie, and my father has passed away. And there has been some other changes and losses. And in a lot of ways, when I see them through the lens of sort of the bigger picture view of my life, I can see how it was removing some dead weight. It was like passing away from some things that were long overdue that needed to change. But that doesn't change the fact, and I'm not talking about the deaths, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still sad, it's still loss, and we still grieve. And so I'm examining my practices, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and questioning them. Like, is this really a practice that's allowing me to engage with what I feel? Because that would be the point of the practice, or is it helping me to escape or prevent me from feeling, which is not really the point of a practice because that's not, well, I mean, that could be a practice, but it's not a very healthy one, generally speaking. And I had to sort of bounce this off my therapist, and we sort of discussed those things. And she said that grief is like in one hand, it's like a ball in a box, and it expands and it fills the box, and there's a button in the box. And as the ball moves around, it hits that button, but we can't really see the button and we don't know when that's really happening. And so the button gets pressed and we are wherever we are and we feel whatever we feel. And that's the nature of grief. And eventually the ball does not get smaller, but the box gets bigger. And I really like this metaphor. And this last week, when we met, we discussed how grief is also feeling without form. It's lost its container. It lost what holds it. In the magical traditions, like I have with the Temple of Witchcraft, we look at the Grail or the Cup of Compassion. This tool which represents the element of water and feeling and dreams and vision and all of those sorts of things. And it is filled with a liquid, sometimes water, sometimes wine, other things, but these represent these nourishing liquids, right? These offerings and those sorts of, in that sense. When we have grief, like the glass is shattered, and so the water is everywhere. It doesn't really have something to hold it or contain it, and so it just goes everywhere. And so those two metaphors, those two examples of comparing, looking at grief creatively and what it means metaphorically for what it means for you personally were active in what I was saying. And I realized something about myself that I have been a person, I am a witch, uh, with very large Eastern and Buddhist influences in my work and a lot of occult practices that give me something that I do every day, especially when I'm seeing people. If I'm seeing you as a client, I want to make sure that when you walk into whatever space that I am in, that it is crystal clear and there is not another psychic force in that room except what we bring in for you at the time of the reading to serve your highest good and greatest well-being. And that applies when I do healings as well, or any sort of magical work, you can ask any of my students when they've gone to the house that I've been at in the last 21 years, well, maybe it's been about, that particular house, it's been about 11 years, but um, 22 or 3 years in Los Angeles. But either way, if someone has walked into the house, they will tell you that when they do the ritual, they feel those energies specifically and they don't feel anything else because I clear the house. Then I keep the house as a sacred space so that there's no dust bunny, so to speak, hanging around, and make sure that when we're all together in our practice that we enter those spaces clean so that we can get into the real experience of whatever the ritual or class is without a bunch of extraneous stuff attaching to us. Everything is a thought form, right? From what I dreamed up to or inspired to give to you today, to a spell, to immaterial guides. These are all thought forms, animated because they're spirits. When we talk about guides in certain ways, but they're all thought forms. And when we do ritual, when we do things, we want to keep the space clean because if it's not, then we're encountering those other things in the space. This is also why I do circles and don't just do open magic out in the middle of everything because I don't need everything attracted to what I'm doing. And I don't need necessarily the curiosity of things when I'm doing those things because I want precise, good, clean, healthy, awesome magic. Magic, healing, and reading. When we do those together, this is what I do. But that I've not been in that space in the home that I've been in for the last 11 or so years. I have not been engaging my practice. I've also not been engaging my whole practice of clearing and all those things because I've been at hospitals, I've been doing all these things, and my schedule has been really all over the place. So I started to re-engage that practice, especially in the last week, especially in the last couple of days when I just felt like my grief was overwhelming me. So what do I do when I talk about my practice? I align myself, I connect to the earth and the sky as the way that it's right for me. I connect to whatever my divinity is. I'm not prescribing anything for anybody else. I'm sort of skipping over those details. And then I clear the space around me. And then I connect to the heart of what I do. And then I affirm my purpose and I open to the inspiration, love, and power that is guiding me in those things. And I ask for insight and I make my way forward and I power myself up in certain ways through light body practices. And I set intentions for a day. And I connect to my cosmic or most holy self and I bring that forward through my heart. And these are the things that I do. And I ground them in the tools of my practice as I learned in magic and witchcraft, and as I sort of polished in the mystery school of the Temple of Witchcraft. And I hadn't been doing that. So grief was that ball in a box hitting my button. And then sometimes it was liquid without a cup and it was all over the place. What I noticed when I did my practice is I had a vessel for my soul experience in my practice. Because I had a vessel for myself. There was purpose in that moment in my day. Because there was purpose in the moment in my day, there was a place for me to feel grief and for it to be felt and be channeled some. Um, I really want that to land in the way that is to say, practice isn't just casting spells or aligning with the moon or a breath work, right? Like necessarily. These are methods that are in a sort of constellation of things that you do. And when you do that whole constellation of something, it lights up in a certain way for you. And if it's part of a tradition, it's often empowered by that tradition. That lighting up comes from both ends. It comes from within you and it comes from the energy, the egregore or the current of whatever it is that you're practicing. And and so it has potency or power to it. So whether it's a yogic tradition that you're doing and Buddhist, Tibetan, or magical occult, part of a lodge or a coven, you know, or even just a tradition that's very open and you can pick up online and learn along with someone by going through the weekly lessons or something. These things have potency to them and they should not be dismissed. it's very easy for us to a la carte our spirituality. And I think the a la carte spirituality is really great. And I've done this when I'm tasting and savoring and discerning what is right or wrong for me. But in the end, I need to understand how these technologies work for me and what's really behind them so that I am informed about what's informing them so that why they work for me, I better understand it. I'm a witch. I'm about knowledge. I'm about knowing things, right? Because I'm a better person for knowing how things work. In fact, I think I'm more faithful in knowing how things work. I could probably argue that. So my practices do these things for me, as I said, alignment and heart centering and all these things. And what I found the other day is that I suddenly felt held. I was holding myself because I was in the stability of the things that bring me into the current of my old soul light and my own inner wisdom and my own power and love and connection and relationship to the world. And when that was evident to me, that I had these grief and feelings, even though they didn't necessarily have a container because the person is gone. For example, my dog is gone. They had a pathway. They had a way to come up in me and be felt and be expressed because that's the genius of the practice as I put it together for myself, that it does a thing that allows me to be intuitive, aware, aligned, heart centered, grounded, feeling even the hard stuff, and to breathe through it. So, grief may be a ball in a box hitting a button we cannot see. And we're waiting for our life to expand to make that box bigger, knowing that the grief will always be there. Or it may be feeling without a form. It might be liquid without a cup. It might be all over the place. But a good, healthy practice that helps you daily to feel that you are grounded and that you are aligned with yourself and that you are connected to the universe or the world or whatever it is that's greater than you. And that gives you that sense of connection to the world. And maybe even it has some philosophy in it that gives you some suggestions, the way to point your morals in a way that really support you in your community and support your community in return. I mean, I'm not going to argue with that. I think it's a great idea. But when you have that, there's space for that grief to enter your life. So even though the form of the person that the grief might be related to is gone, the practice creates a space for that grief to exist, for your grief to exist. And what is grief? Is love that has nowhere to go for the object or the person or the thing that it's connected to, not to objectify people. This is why it's so important for practice. This is why it's so important to have a direction for things. A card just fell out of the B. I'm using the B tarot, and it is the barrow. Let's do this. That's how we see it in this deck. The barrow, which would be um, 5, 6, 7. That is the chariot, right? Yeah. No, it falls out of this deck as I'm speaking this thing, and I like to look at those things as they come up because that's important. And that would be, um, yeah, this is momentum, action, and will. This is saying, yes, Scott, as you're talking about this, let's pull up this chariot card. Let's pull up this energy card that shows the movement of things. Strength, are we talking about here? Strength, what we're talking about here. Um, that this is a direction for things, that this is a path or a purpose. This is an affirmation of what you're talking about um, in uh, in in the tarot. So I'm just going to look at this little definition here as written by Kristoffer Hughes, the author of this deck, in the writing. Um, and he says this is a commitment to, is your commitment to paying off and things are moving along exactly as you predicted or desired. Be cautious that you don't let your guard down. Don't leave anything to chance or to fate. Maintain your discipline and your vision. There may be obstacles ahead, but you have the necessary abilities and skill to deal with them head on. It may feel that the front wheel of your barrow has a buckle under the strain of things, but it doesn't matter how hard you seem to push. It feels like you're pushing through treacle. This may be a result of taking on too much too soon, not having a proper plan in place to regroup, rethink, and try again. It's really funny. I just can't seem to place this car on the standard tarot deck, but I'm fine with that. I'm fine with having a problem in doing a little reading like this. It's 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 a sign of process or progress, and it's asking us to look at things, to pace ourselves, and to see that there are ways to dealing with things. Then when I see that barrow, I see a vessel to carry the hive, a vessel to carry the meaning of things. So so I leave that there, and let's carry things. So that's really what I want to say about practice. That the practice is not just spells or talking to spirits. The practice is not just something that you do to get something. A practice is something that you do regularly. You do this every day. You do this in order to fortify yourself. A good practice is done every day, and it feels sometimes at a certain point boring, rote, like nothing. But you push through your feelings and you continue to do it. And you just continue to self generate that through the practice. In the end, when you encounter an obstacle, when you encounter a true challenge in your life, you automatically lean back into that practice. And suddenly there is a substance to work with in what you're doing. There's a form to carry it, whatever it is you're feeling. And there's maybe even power or some wisdom that comes to you that's born of that practice. Because the thing that we practice over and over and over again is the thing that we become intuitive about. And I wrote about this in Reiki Spirit, and I'm going to say it here again. Intuition is not some mystical, magical woo thing. Intuition is an inner sense of ourselves and the outer world, and it is born from repetition and expense. It's trained in this expensive repetition. So my uncles and my father, are or were very intuitive about cars. And you would not think intuition and cars are a thing because we conflate intuition with magic and psychism, right? But what is psychism? This is a thing of the mind, right? But intuition is really born of repetition of something that you become so good at it that you no longer think about it, that you can just sort of lean into it and do it. Not only that, but that you start to maybe apply that technology that you have learned with your mind through repetition to make connections between other things, and you intuit what the purpose is or the direction it may go or what it might mean. This is intuition. So intuition is not necessarily some mystical thing, right? It can be. It's applied in that sort of way, but you can be intuitive about your meditative practice. You can be intuitive about your Reiki practice. You can be intuitive about your cooking, but it doesn't mean that you're drawing from some mystical nowhere. It means that you're drawing from the experiences that you have. If your intuition is related to a practice that allows you to channel guides in a certain way, and you've done this repeatedly, you may be intuitive about drawing information from mystical places, right? It can be both. I'm not saying I'm not poo-pooing anything. It can be both, but it is everyone has intuition, right? It's part of our nature self. It's part of our animal self. It's part of our deep self, and our nature connection to the world. Um, a practice is going to help you in that way. So grief is seeking form and not finding it. So it's love feeling like sadness or loss. And practice is a way to hold that. I'm just going to pull the cards here today. And we have, for our card, the actual reading of things, we have the Two of Swords. I like this card really because it speaks to several things. And it does give a little bit of a warning. There is the person in the card. They are blindfolded and holding two swords. So they're tapping into that intuition. They're feeling the weight of them, right? They're feeling the weight of them and deciding on what that means. But in deciding what that means, that's based on their knowledge through their experiences. So the intuitive decision is based on the knowledge of their experiences. So what do they know about weight? What do they know about swords? What do they know about the purpose of the swords? How do you translate that into what might be coming up for you this week? Weighing and feeling things, it's not just your intuitive pull towards it. It's also What do you know about those things? And how does that intuition and that knowledge come together? How does it create a form for what it is that you're feeling? And what does that mean? And what does that mean for you and what you want to do next? It's a very simple reading for the week. It's a very simple message. That intuition is seeking a form. It's seeking a practice. Grief is seeking a form. It could be useful to feel it in the practice. Is that back and forth I'd like to put forward as a message. Find your practice that works for you. Trust your desire for what brings you joy, what you're really interested in, what's juicy. Get into that practice, even when it feels boring, even when it feels like you're going to do this again today. That's precisely the challenge of a practice is yes, do that again today. A good spiritual practice, a good disciplined practice is going to challenge you. And the place that it's first going to challenge you is in its repetitive nonsense that feels like it's not doing anything. Honestly, and speaking from years of experience, regardless of your practices and having done several, from wacky New Age light body and occult magic and witchcraft to more Buddhist meditations and mindfulness practices, the mind will throw up lots of reasons to deviate from a practice. It will prevent you from opening doors and going deeper. There is mindfulness in everything, even though it may not be the same kind of mindfulness when we're talking about Buddhist practices versus occult or whatever, although there's a lot of similarities. It's engaging it regardless. So, what is your practice? Get interested in one, see what it might be for you. Understand that when you do this, and when you see this, these repetitive things that you do over and over again, you build an intuitive strength. So maybe look at what your intuitive strengths are this week and see what that might mean for you. And when I say what that might mean for you, and this is my final thought, why are we being asked to look at this? Why is this a point of interest? Because what's coming next? That might be what our intuition is really telling us. To those places where we might need an automatic response that's correct and for our highest good and healthy for us now, right? Is born of that intuition, born from those repetitions. It's not something to say like, oh, you better do it, right? But it is a mindfulness. It is a mindfulness that if we really want to be intuitive about something, it's born of practice and experience. So that's my little meaty for you this weekend. I'm Scott Smith. You can find me at starandstonellc.com. I'm all over the interwebs with my name, Scott K. Smith. You can also find my book, Reiki Spirit, on Amazon, and you can get it on Kindle as well. I just lowered the price on that. And there's a whole chapter in there on intuition and developing intuition with Reiki. That's a big portion of what I do in that book is teach practices that allow you to become intuitive with the Reiki. Thank you for listening. Blessed be, blessed be, blessed be. This is Scott Smith, and I will see you next week.